All right, we are live. We've got Justin Ritchie over here, and we're going to be talking about beach fishing, catching snook in particular from the shoreline during the summer. This is a great way to fish for all areas that have snook. Summertime, they come out on the beaches. They're a ton of fun. A lot, in many cases, you're sight fishing, which is always a blast. And you don't have to have any fancy boats or anything special other than just your shoes, or actually you don't even need shoes. You can go flat barefoot and have one rod and a couple lures that we'll talk about and go out and catch some fish. So Justin, it should be a fun time.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah, man.
this is the season.
What it's like one of the most underrated, easiest fishing you can do on either the east or the west coast of Florida. Snook fishing on the beach is like just going back to it's simplistic. Keep it simple, couple of lures, little tackle bag, little drawstring bag, and one rod. And you're getting an exercise and it's an active sport. Like instead of using the trolling motor and cruising around the flats or hitting points and things, you're walking, you're covering ground on the beach. And you're, a lot of times if you just want to get an early morning bite, you can be done by 9:30, 10 o'clock if it's good. So this is a unique time of the year. This coming into the summer and through the heat of the summer, these snook get really fired up on the beaches. And I think it's just something fun to kind of break it up a little bit. You can take a friend, and it's really accessible for a lot of people. So we want to talk a lot about it.
Yeah, and because we get a lot of questions about, I don't have a boat. What, where can I fish? And so this is it. And so this, if you don't have a boat, this is an advantage. And I've done beaches fishing from the boat a lot. It's still possible, but it's way easier when you're on the shoreline. And for those who are a little bit nervous to get in and wade fish because of stingrays, great news, because you don't need to be in the water. In many cases, you're better off not being in the water. And so we'll go through that. So I think almost, and we're going to break it up East Coast, West Coast. There are a lot of mostly similarities, but there are some nuances, particularly in lure selection, that's important to know. But I think number one, I'll just kick it off as far as the thing to think about is the time that you're fishing. So summertime, that's the snooker out there. Also, the beach goers are out there. So it's important to get out there early. So get out there before the crowds, because once those crowds come, snooker's still there, by the way, and you can see them in many cases. They'll be zigzagging in and out of people, but they're going to be spooked. So get out there early. Ideally, if you're on the East Coast, you're watching the sun come up, and then if you're on the West Coast, really the same thing, but your back's to it. But be out there as the sun's coming up. And then you can stay till about 9 o'clock ish, as Justin mentioned. That's going to be generally the best. You can still catch in the middle of the day, but the morning time is definitely going to be the top zone. And then also the evenings too. I go out a lot in the evenings. As the sun's going down, it's more blind casting because it's tougher to see. But the snook are there and they're feeding, and there's less humans in there spooking them up. So, what would you say is number two, Justin?
Tides, actually. I found that on the West Coast, and I'd say on the East Coast too, I would prefer a high tide. When the water rises up, all that bait's going to rush up much, much further. And on a lower tide, there's this trough structure. Okay. The first trough before you make it out to the first sandbar on the West Coast is just a little bit shallower. So you'll probably be working lures a little bit quicker. You won't have as much area to cover. And in the morning, the fish are fired up. But I think that having a higher tide, pushing all that bait fish like right where the shore break is happening, right where the waves are coming up onto the sand, you'd be surprised at how shallow these snook are really hunting and eating, pilchards and whiting and all kinds of baits that are out there. I've always had better success on a higher tide personally. You can do it on a lower tide, but I feel like if the water is higher, you don't need to cast out far. You're kind of casting just right, I don't know, 5 feet off of where the waves are breaking on the shoreline. It's really shallow, and you're casting parallel to the water instead of straight out and bringing it back in. So I'd say tide is the next big one for me. How I fish and how far out I'm casting or how close parallel I'm casting to the beach is going to depend on what that tide is.
Yeah, and a big thing. So the incoming and outgoing definitely works. Incoming is technically the better of the two. So if you can choose, do incoming, and a big reason is, like Justin was mentioned, as that water is going up, all those crabs and all the stuff that's kind of buried itself in the sand. Now they have to get up and start moving in, and all those whiting push up shallow. And snook feed best. They're ambush predators. They feed best when that water's a little bit churned up. So they're literally feeding on the shore break, like right in the shore break. And that's the incoming tide is when all that food really just kind of just congregates in there. But again, still outgoing current still solid, but incoming has a slight advantage. Um, so now, as far as I think positioning, right? We always talk about positioning with boats and with kayaks. We actually have a course about positioning. It's so important. It's also important for beach fishing snook. And as Justin mentioned, those fish are right on the shoreline. And so if you're going out, I think a big mistake I see people do is they're wading out like knee or waist deep, worst case, waist deep, but even knee deep and they're casting out. In many cases, snook are going behind them. So I've seen a ton of situations where people are trying to catch snook. They're wading out thinking that they need, to reach them way out on the back end of the second bar. In reality, they're like the snook are going right behind them. So
I did it.
yeah, we all did it.
Yeah, like I remember my first time in Sanibel, I walked out with my dad and I had a rattle trap because I wanted something that would move fast, was really loud and aggressive, and would get down deeper. And I was chest deep and I was throwing out to the second sandbar and trying to hold my rod and reel in the air, reel. And I think by the second day, after talking to some locals and this was 12 years ago, and they were like, yeah, the snooker, if the water hits your toes, take like 10 steps back or 5 steps back and cast parallel and work your baits parallel to the shoreline. And I'm like, that's only less than a foot of water. And people were like, yes, that's where the fish are. So it's a unique fishery because everywhere else you want to cover a lot of water out, and you're still covering a lot of water in the scenario, but you're fishing it much differently. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so a lot of another tip, and actually, in general, if the water's clear, I'm actually Otis is out there causing trouble. I might have to let him in here in a second. But in general, if the water's clear, especially if it's clear and calm, I'd get like 10 feet off the shoreline because those snook, they're not dumb, right? They're used to looking for people and looking for danger. So I get way off the shoreline. You can still see them, right? You want to be as far away as possible while still being able to see in the water. So 10, sometimes even further, and just you can cast right there in the shore break and you can just catch a ton of fish. And the shallower the snook are, the more likely they are to eat. Now they're up there. They're not there just to hang out. They're there to feed. And so make sure to not position yourself too far out, I would say would be a big tip. So going to the next one, I'm going to go get Otis, who's barking up the storm out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. So with snook fishing, I kind of want to, let's just jump right into lures. Luke will come back and we'll tag team that. There's a lot of lures. We talk all the time about, fishing the flats, fishing oysters, fishing different types of structure for redfish and trout. But when fishing for snook on the beach, you can use all the same lures that you use on the flats, but I think that certain lures have a big advantage when fishing the beach. And Luke kind of powwowed with me on it, and we're in agreement that there's a good 3 or 4 or 5 lures that excel when fishing the beach in terms of water coverage, bait fish imitation, and action, because they're all going to be a little different. Some are straight retrieve, some are twitching, and you just kind of mix it up based on how these snook are feeding any given day. You're going to choose a different lure whether you see a lot of bait or you see no bait, or the water's clear or the water's dirty. You'll make a couple decisions based on those conditions. But unanimously, in terms of like just an initial go-to to get your feet wet, pun intended, I think we would agree that a good search tool in this situation is definitely a slam shady on a paddle tail. You've got just vibration. You've got a small pilchard whitebait, small whiting profile. And in terms of jig head size, I would start light. If the water's really, really high, maybe you can go to a little bit heavier jig head, but an 1/8 ounce should get the job done right off the bat, especially since you're going to be working that shore break really, really shallow. Go light, start with an 1/8 ounce. And that's going to be, I think, the immediate, that looks just like a glass minnow. Like that's spot on. This kind of off-white silvery presentation is primo. I wish I had this color 10 years ago. That would be my initial go-to. And then we'll make some changes from there. What do you think about about starting with a Slam Shady. How are you going to present that? Like, if you're going to work the Slam Shady for snook, would you straight retrieve it? Would you hop it? What are the things that run through your head when you're swimming it?
So I do a little bit of both. So yeah, the Slam Shady paddle tail. Well, we now have a 3 inch, a 3.5, a 4, and a 5, and the size will be based on whatever size bait's around. And so if the bait's really small, then I'll actually get the 3.5. This is the Slam Shady 2.0. It actually has great darting action when the tail's off. So I literally will rip off 1.5 inch of tail. Now you have a little nub to match the bait. That's very important. If you have the wrong size bait, wrong size profile, in many cases that'll be a game changer just to actually to lower. That's the cool thing about soft plastic. So as far as retrieve, if I'm using a paddle tail, I don't know, I catch a lot of them just doing a straight retrieve. Sometimes the jerking motion actually spooks fish, so I usually start with a straight retrieve. And the cool thing with beach fishing is that as long as you don't spook them, you can get 10 casts out of them, right? If you're off the beach, if you're positioning yourself properly, where you see it from a long ways off, you're holding way off against it, I'll make a cast and I'll do a straight retrieve that has the least amount of risk of spooking. So I'll lead it by a good amount. I'll just do a straight retrieve and then see if it reacts to it, right? In many cases, you can see if it sees it or not. It'll usually turn or do something if it sees it. If it doesn't see it, it'll just, look like it never even saw it, and then you can make another cast. But if it doesn't react to that one, then I'll do one where I'm bouncing on the bottom. I'll pause it, right? Pause it in front and do a little twitch. So I don't know. They all work, right? Sometimes they like it super fast and straight. Sometimes they like the twitching motion, the bouncing on the bottom. So with a paddle tail in particular, if I'm using a jerk bait style, like either with the paddle tail without the tail or one like this, then it's generally the double twitch jerk is most often going to work.
That's a good lure. Totally forgot that. Okay, the 4 inch Z-Man Slam Shady Jerk Shad is, I mean, just the fact that it's 4 inch, because most jerk shads are 5. A lot of times these, even big snook, are feeding in on a little bit smaller profile, at least on the West Coast. The bait profile on the West Coast is going to be about 4 inches and smaller. And I think that 4 inch jerk shad, I saw that earlier. I joined the team and I got more familiar with the fact that they make a 4 inch model in that same shady color. And I thought, that's gold. Like, I have to have that on a jig head and just jerk it and twitch it around as an alternative to a straight retrieve. So for sure, that's a good call.
Yeah, this one's brand new, and so I actually haven't used it, but it's on an 1/8 ounce jig head, right? Just same as the paddle tail. We don't need to be super deep water. If the waves are current or strong, then I'll go to a 3/16 or even a 1/4 ounce. But if it's just a West Coast fishing normal stuff, then 1/8 ounce is plenty. And East Coast, I'll go up to a 1/4 just because the shore break's usually bigger. But yeah, a little small. Obviously it doesn't have to be Slam Shady. We obviously would prefer that, but white works good too, right? Just make sure that it's light colored. And that seems to outperform all the. So this color in particular, it seems to outperform all of them, but white would work too.
So before Slam Shady, I would look for things that looked like Slam Shady, because pearl is great, but I wanted a little bit of off white, because sometimes when you're fishing in really crystal clear water, there's a lot of contrast between pearl white and Slam Shady. And I would just, scrounge all of the bait shops nearby to find something that was it had a little bit of flash and flake in it, but was kind of like a little bit dulled color, just something that seemed more like a natural approach, because I just didn't want something with so much contrast. Pearl does work well. I think this works better. I think that's the whole point. So I'm really excited. I've not had a lot of opportunities to put Slam Shady stuff to use, because a lot of the beach fishing I did was before that color was even out there. And now I think it's going to be with me, out of the 6-7 lures I take with me in my little tackle tray and my drawstring bag, for sure. Like, that's going to be the go-to.
Yeah. And so one that I've been using a lot lately, the beach we've had a lot of wind coming from the west, a lot of shore wind, onshore wind, and it's blown a lot of weeds into the surf. And so the traditional jig heads, these traditional jig heads like we were showing earlier, it just snags on the weeds a lot, and it can become a nuisance. And so one relatively new jig head that's out, it's called the Texas Eye jig head. It actually Z-Man makes it, and this is my favorite for when there's weeds out. I actually prefer the other one without the weeds, because this does I have seen a decrease in hookup ratios. on this Texas eye versus the traditional. But when there's weeds around, this has a huge advantage because it is much more streamlined. So there's really nothing on there that's going to snag onto the weeds. Even this front, right? You tie the non-slip loop knot, the tag end's going backwards. The tag end's not going to snag it. This head is pretty well streamlined. That's not going to snag the weeds. And you can have the hook right there at the top, basically pressed up against the soft plastic. That's not going to snag the weeds. And so this has a huge advantage when there's weeds in the surf. So make sure to have that in your arsenal. You never really know how bad the weeds are until you get there. So usually I'll start out with the jig head, but I'll have one of those Texas eyes in my pocket. And as soon as I'm having weed issues, I immediately make the switch.
Yep, it's a quick change. And the thing to note is that with these smaller snook, let's say 25 inches and smaller, they can, if they're just fired up and they're zigzagging around and they're attacking little fry bait, there is a potential that with the Texas eye that they could short strike it, they could hit the tail, and you might not get that hook up. But you hook a 27 or 28 inch snook or bigger, they're gonna clobber the whole thing. Like they're gonna eat it so fast that sometimes you won't even be able to get a hook set. You're just going to get that eat, and instantaneously drag's going to start screaming. So, I do really like the Texas eye for that same scenario. Fishing over on the East Coast in the Atlantic, we do have floating weeds, and it can be a little bit rougher surf a lot of times. That trough can be a little bit deeper, and you don't know what you're going to get into. There's shell and rock bottom and just like coquina shelves. So I do like to either bounce or slow retrieve a little bit bigger profile. So I've got the Slam Shady Bomber, trying to get out of this super aggressive white light. Slam Shady Bomber on a 1/4 ounce Texas eye. I always like to go a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier when I'm fishing on the East Coast, because a lot of times, again, it's deeper. We've got a little bit rougher conditions and a lot of different types of structure that can pop up on the East Coast from Brevard County all the way down to Miami. So go with a little bit bigger profile initially. Like Luke said, start off with the jig head, but if you're going to be fishing areas with a shelly bottom or grass, that Texas eye is great. It's a good weedless option and relatively new. Only Texas eye's only been out for a couple of years, not super long, right?
Yeah, if that. Yeah, it's new. And as far as the line size, just knowing how snook are on fraying line, they are amazingly good. They don't have teeth, but they have that rough surface mouth, and they do a lot of head shakes. I generally go with at least 30 pound. I used to do 20 pound, but as soon as you hook up to one of those big ones, 20 pound, even 20 pound mono, right? Mono has more abrasion than a 20 pound fluoro, but that 20 pound mono still doesn't do the job. So now I pretty much always use at least 30 pound mono. Oh, yeah. Yeah, obviously you can go fluoro. I just don't, because I like the abrasion resistance of the mono. But one trick, I've learned this from Peter Deeks. He does it with live bait. It works good with artificials too. Is to, snook are very good. They're very wary at feeling movement in the water. And so if it's a calm day, right, if it's a flat, calm day, then we have to be extra careful to not spook these fish. And so they can feel a thicker leader. If you have a 2.5 foot strand of leader, those snook can feel it with that big black line. That is how they feel. They have amazingly good feel. And so to combat that, I do a 20 pound mono first. So like a foot, maybe a little bit over a foot of 20 pound mono. And then the last, say 6 to 8 inches, that's the 30. So that's the part, this last 6 to 8 inches, that's the business in. That's where the abrasion happens. It's not the gill plate, it's their mouth. I used to think that the gill plates did it. And I've actually on snook, I've kept the lure in their mouth, and I've tried to get that line in their gill plate while opening the snook's mouth. It is almost impossible to get that line into the gill plate. So most snook breakoffs are from the mouth. And if we just protect that last, 4 to 6 inches or a little bit more, that'll get the job done. So that's a good way.
What are you tying when you tie that trace 30 pound to your 20 pound? You just doing a Unity Uni?
Uni works. The blood knot is better. It's just a lower profile. So the blood knot is basically, it's the cinch knot or the clinch knot or whatever on both sides. And so we can put a link down below for that. So it's a strong knot. I've actually, this is what I caught my biggest snook ever, right? When I was fishing with Deeks, it was a 20 pound fluoro in that case to a 50 pound. And that snook just hammered it, and that knot held up. So
that's smart. I never thought about doing that, because you're right. If you're running a big trace of 40, which I've done, like on the East Coast, I'll just go big the whole time because I do not want a 35-inch fish breaking me off on 30. And it happens, you know, and I've run straight 30, but I like that trace method because you can still get a solid leader and then have your bite protection, just like with fly fishing, but we're applying it to, you know, rolling plastics and hard baits too. So kind of talking about a different lure, something that if I don't have a lot of time and I want to be on the go and walk pretty quick and I want to cover a lot of ground, as an alternative to a paddle tail, something that's going to give off a little bit more vibration, a little bit more flash, I will go with a spoon. Just a good old silver spoon, could be a Johnson Silver Minnow. I'm actually going to be trying out the Aqua Dream. I think this is the golden pilchard and the white pilchard because I like that white contrast as that's spinning and moving through the water. I think it's just kind of like a blinker. Spoons are excellent. They're so simple. When I started doing this, and I did all the research with my dad and my brother before. I did a lot of snook fishing on the beach before I ever had a kayak or could get on a boat. The beaches were all that I had. And I struggled to find stuff that was successful, thinking I needed super realistic lures to get bites. Like, oh man, they're going to love the way that looks and move through the water. And my dad and my brother were like, oh no, all the reports say that a spoon is the way to go. And I was like, nonsense. And they showed me up. They got like a 35 and a 32-inch snook in like the first 30 minutes of fishing. So I was clearing out all the shops of silver spoons. They're great. They're simple. They just the way that they move and they flutter and they spin. I don't know what it is. It's just got the right kind of action, and it's a good search bait tool. So aside from having a paddle tail, weedless around a jig head, I think a spoon is definitely something to have in your back pocket.
Yep. Yeah, shockingly good. The spoons in a store, right? To like somebody brand new in a store, they look like the worst lure you could possibly get. They don't look like anything. Right? They're just a curved piece of metal, but it's shocking how effective they are. They work good inshore, but on the beaches too. I've even used gold spoons in the surf, and that they work too. It seems like the silver is better. I haven't tried the white on the surf, but that is a good idea. If and
Yeah,
the fact that the white lures work, it makes total sense that the white spoons will work there too.
for sure.
Well, I'll make sure to pick one of those up and we can try that out this summer and do some analysis on it. And so there's one other lure you mentioned earlier. One other hard lure that you mentioned earlier. Maybe we'll throw that
Ah,
off. The Miro
this one
lure.
right here. So one of my biggest snook down in Sanibel was on a Maridine. I really like using this when I know there are glass minnow pods or a bait congregation. If there's little pilchards, little glass minnows, and you see them showering or flicking, obviously when you're walking up and down this beach and you find a little school of bait, 100% there's going to be snook in and around it, even if you don't see them. And I feel like having something that's going to stay in the strike zone, give off a little bit of flash and a little bit of rattle is going to grab their attention. It's going to look like one of the glass minnows or bait fish if these snook have zoomed in, pecked at, and injured, and it's going to be an easy meal opportunity. So different than hopping and jerking in an erratic motion or a straight retrieve back with a spoon and a paddle tail. I think you can stay in the strike zone a little bit better. And a lot of times when even if there's some waves and there's some wash that's disorienting this bait, that's when I had got my big snook. I think it was 37 or 38 inches on a Miradine early in the morning. And there was waves, just a slow roll breaking down the shoreline. And if I could stall it and keep it in the wave, that was the ticket. So definitely going to make sure I have that with me when we're walking.
Cool. And another one too, we'll do the final lure, and all these were great, but the old trusty bucktail. I think Justin, you
Oh,
might
yeah.
have one, but bucktails, they're again, it's kind of like a spoon where they don't look all that fancy, but they just flat out work. And so it's just I've always used these white bucktails. That was how I started. It was always Millie's bucktails. They unfortunately don't make those anymore. Those that's what I started snook fishing with. But just a white bucktail, quarter ounce ish, plus or minus.
Yeah.
It just flat out works. It flat out just catches fish.
Yep. The I don't know why deer hair works. I'm not entirely sure because when you look at it in the water, it does kind of look natural. When it gets wet, it compresses and it's not this, volume big bait that you see right here when it's dry. When it's wet, it's really, really tight. And I guess it does kind of look like a glass minnow or something hopping around. Uh, Probably one of my go-to sight fishing snook baits. So if you are out there and it's calm and it's later on in the morning, 9:30 or 10, and people starting to show up before everybody gets in the water, and you see snook, you can cat and mouse the snook with a bucktail where you're hopping in front of them and they're slowly easing up on it. And with the speed that you move your bucktail, it's the speed that the snook is going to follow that lure. And it's this cat and mouse game that's a lot of fun. So bucktail, that's probably my most fun lure to throw at snook, because it's so reactionary. And sometimes you just get these fish fired up where they're attacking it, not necessarily out of hunger, but because you pissed them off. Like, and it's just a lot of fun to have. So a Spro quarter ounce, it would be a good go-to. We have them in white. Any white bucktail or natural colored bucktail, I think is that's my Hail Mary, and that's just my fun play lure, especially if I can see snook. It works great too when you can't see them, but I think that because it works a little bit slower, it's best applied when you can actually get up on these fish that are slowly cruising the beach.
Cool. Yeah, and that's really it. So those are lures, right? It's not a crazy amount. And in general, I'll just take like one or two of them. And generally, if I know the water's clear, like the bucktail, something with a little bit less vibration is oftentimes going to win, just because it's less likely to spook the fish off. But if the water's murky or if the waves are big, then then like the paddle tails or just anything with, or that mirror lure, something with rattles is very important. So just keep that in mind. It's just the same as we're fishing the flats, right? If it's super calm and clear, you want to have less noise, less vibration. And then if it's turned up, cloudy, murky, whatever, then you need to give those fish some more vibration, because that's going to help them dial into it. But yeah, it's just a fun fishery. It's an amazing time, and best of all, it's accessible to everybody. So there's no excuses not to go. You can't have excuse that my boat's not working or that I don't have a boat. Whatever the case is, anybody can go do it, and it's just a blast.
And you don't need specialized tackle. Take your flats rod. Take your 7'6" medium action flats rod. Just change your leader up approach. Have 4 or 5, maybe 6 lures max. And what I'll do is I'll take just an inexpensive like drawstring bag, a tackle tray with a couple lures, pliers, leader, bottle of water, and in 2-3 hours, I can go out and get some really nice fish, and then get to work, Luke. So yeah. I mean, it's accessible, it's fun. I think it's underrated. I really think everybody should do it if you have the opportunity.
Yeah, and then just make sure to just to be ready for it. As Justin said, even just like a 6-foot rod, like you don't have to cast very far, right? So if you're on the way to work or whatever, and you can't fit a 7-6 rod in your car or whatever, just get a little 2-piece, just a travel rod. As long as you can cast it 50, 60 feet, that's plenty. That's more than enough. That's usually the max for sight fishing. And even if you're not sight fishing, you're still not going to need 50, 60 foot cast. They're usually going to be doing like a 30 to 50 foot cast. And that's the range of pretty much any rod can deliver that.
I think we should probably point out and say that, like, same with your flat setup, 10-pound braid is more than enough. When you're out there, there are areas that have fallen trees or rocks or points, and that will definitely congregate fish. But if you're just fishing open, expansive beach, sometimes these snook aren't really keyed into structure, and it's just wide open sand. 10-pound braid is perfectly fine. And like Luke said, I like that 20-pound to maybe a bite tippet of 30 is all you really need. You don't need to have beefed up braid to fight a really big snook, because they're just going to run out. And oftentimes out on this open beach, they're not going to get you on anything. So when you hook up, take your time and fight them.
Yeah. And so one final tip to reward you for listening for this long is the odds of seeing more snook get much greater as you're close to a pass or an inlet. Right. So if you can, try to prioritize your fishing, around a pass or an inlet, within, like, again, 500 yards or more, or plus or minus. That's going to significantly increase. There are still going to be plenty of snook on 20 plus miles of shoreline with no inlets, but around those inlets are going to be more. However, there's going to be more human pressure too. So that's the other side of it, where there's going to be less human pressure on those kind of vast stretches.
Yeah, as we've learned, recently with Moat, because we worked with Moat Aquaculture here this week, that's going to be their breeding ground. I mean, these snook are stacking up in the passes on the West Coast and around inlets on the East Coast. They're moving water, there's bait, easy to release eggs and milt and reproduce. And after that, these females are hungry. So their first venture point is going to be out from those passes and inlets, north and south, on the beach. So that's the good starting point for sure. I think later on in the summer, as they've spawned out, they might start moving further away from the beach, or further away from the pass. But that's the starting point. John's Pass. I'm trying to think of a couple others. Turtle Beach, around Lido Key, Siesta Key, any of those. And if you get there early in the morning before people show up, you'll likely do well. This is the best time of the year. Here we are. It's about middle of June. It's going to be hot all the way through middle of August and sometimes even into early September, like you said, Luke, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember getting a lot of them even on Labor Day on the Gulf Coast. On the Atlantic Coast, I lived in Melbourne for a while. I lived on the beach for a couple of years, and the bites seemed to stop sooner. So it was more like a June,
Yeah.
and then part of July, but they're bigger. So the Atlantic Coast, I would say like what Justin was talking about, doing some 40, so 40-pound trays going to the lure, bigger lure, stronger leader, and even a 10-pound braid will still work, but maybe 15 or 20 will just help you get in there quicker.
Yeah.
But on the West Coast, the average size is smaller, so you can definitely get away with, like, I just use 10-pound braid and then that 20 mono to the trace of 30. But yeah, a ton of fun. And for those into fly fishing as well, a great time to go fly fishing. Again, same exact situation. Those snook are close. There's a lot of sight fishing, and in many cases, especially like right now, there's a lot of fry bait in the area, and so flies, and when there's that little small bait fisher in the zone, flies actually have an advantage. So,
Yeah.
good time to take that fly out. You just have to make sure there are a lot of beach walkers, so make sure on your back cast not to snag anybody. is the big risk. As a kid, I had some close calls with that because so focused on the fish, you forget to even look behind you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a ton of fun. We'll be doing we'll actually be getting out and do some filming on this, but just wanted to go ahead and just do this lesson just to help make sure that you have the details needed to go out there and make it happen before we can go through and edit that content. But it's already started, right? It's already started. It's going to continue for at least a month, probably a couple months for many of us, and we have no excuses not to go. So get out there, catch some snook. And please let us know how you do. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions on anything we talked about, please let us know. Leave a comment down below. We'll be happy to help. And if you're new to Salt Strong, just know that we're the best online fishing club in America because we actually guarantee you'll be catching more fish while saving time and money. We do this through our premium education, our exclusive insider community, and huge discounts on all the tackle you need. To learn more, go to saltstrong.com. Otherwise, hope to see you again soon.